Welcome to Northwestern Ontario Voices Ford Francis. I'm your host, Jack Dawson. Today we have a Meet the Mayor edition of the show where we take some time to learn more about our Northwestern Ontario mayors. Today we hear from Andrew Halakas, Mayor of Fort Francis. We asked Mayor Halakas to share the top issues for the region of Fort Francis from his point of view as a municipal leader in our community. Please let us know your thoughts on the issues Mayor Halakas brings up or any questions you may have for him by emailing us at info@northwesternontariovoices.ca. And now, Mayor Halakas.
I'm a retired high school teacher. I attended the University of Waterloo in math and science. I attended the University of Western Ontario and got a degree in education. I taught in Windsor for a number of years, but when we decided we'd like to get a family, my wife and I thought we would like to raise our family in a small community. I'm from Fort Francis originally, and I've always been telling my wife, Debbie, about what a wonderful place it was to grow up. So we moved back up here to raise our family. And I taught at Fort Francis High School for a number of years, ending up as the head of the math and science department. Teaching is my blood. I love to teach. I still miss it to this day. So after I retired from teaching, I worked at Conn College for a number of years doing math and science and physics for them. I also wanted to give back to the community because this community has been wonderful to myself and to my family. So when I retired and had a little bit more time, I was still teaching at the college, but it wasn't a full-time position. I thought I should run for office, so I decided I'd run for council. And so here I am. This is my fourth term. Last term I was deputy mayor, and this term I thought, I think I will run for mayor, and so I did. And I'm glad I did. I think that this is a community worth giving back to, and I want to do the best that I can to ensure that the community moves well into the future. I didn't think Fort Francis was any different than any other community because as a young man, or a young boy really, I hadn't gone to very many places. I mean, we would do the usual, go to Duluth, to Winnipeg, to Thunder Bay. But when I got to university, I knew things were different because when I was growing up in Fort Francis, I had never had pizza. There wasn't any pizza places in Fort Francis. And when I got to university, my roommate said, let's go for a pizza. And I, of course, knew what it was, but I said, well, I've never had pizza. And he was astounded. So we went for pizza, and I still remember the place. It was the International Pizza Place. And I had, he ordered, I didn't know what to order. He ordered pepperoni and mushroom, and it was love at first sight. That pizza was so good. But that's the type of things we didn't have growing up. And also, I love music. I've always loved music, but growing up, like we had a record player. We didn't have a big stereo. When I got to school, there were live bands, you know, there were plays, there were musicals. And again, it was such an eye-opener coming from a small, and let's face it, slightly insular community at that time. This is Fort Francis. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. So going out and, as you put it, into the big world, it really was an eye-opener. And in no way am I putting Fort Francis down because I just love the community. I knew everybody. I knew the shopkeepers. As an example, I remember just walking downtown and I saw an item. It was a clock in Brocky's Jewelers. And I thought, wow, do I like that? That would make a great gift for my mom. And so then I kept going because I didn't have any money on me, and I thought about it some more. And then I was working at that time, and I picked up the phone and I just phoned Brocky's and I said, that clock in the window, that's such a nice clock. Would you be able to put that aside for me? And no problem. They just put the clock aside and they said, come in and pick it up whenever you're ready, Andy. So that type of thing in a small community is just heartwarming. And that's why I wanted to come back and raise my family here. And then the other thing about Fort Frances is, although it's isolated, so we didn't have, the concerts, but we had access to Rainy Lake, and we had access to clean water and fishing and swimming and going out in the bush, we called it, and building forts and cooking hot dogs. It was just a wonderful way to grow up. For a lot of people who live in Southern Ontario, we're an undiscovered gem. Also, for a lot of people in Southern Ontario, we're the great unknown. For example, I have to keep reminding people when I speak to people in Toronto and I'm setting up meetings that we're in a different time zone. And we have to take into account that hour's difference. And also, just a matter of geography, the distances between communities. Again, I talk to people in Toronto. Sometimes I'll pick them up. They'll fly into Thunder Bay, and they're absolutely amazed that we're going to, on a good day, we're going to drive for 4 hours to get from the airport to Fort Frances, where we're going to have the meeting. So that's a real eye-opener for people. And then they're just amazed that, if we go out on the water, I have no qualms if I'm on Rainy Lake with just drinking the water out of the lake. It's clean water, it's good water, and we have an abundance of clean air, clean water, and lots of things to do. When I again speak to people from Southern Ontario, I get this sense that they're busy, they're harried, and when they come up here, I talk to them about, let's go for a walk, let's go for a hike, and we don't have to go very far. And we can be in the woods, and we can hear the birds, and we can smell the beautiful pine trees, or we can go fishing. So that's a real blessing. The vast geography around us. The issues, depending upon who you talk to, will resonate differently. But for me, the overarching issue is the economy. And when you talk about the economy, that leads into all sorts of other subtexts and subtopics. And then I would include in that list of issues homelessness and housing, which really are two separate issues, although they sound the same. And then, of course, as with all Northwestern communities, in fact, all communities in Ontario, we have an opioid problem. We have a problem with addictions and mental health. And then my list might differ. I think those first three issues would be on everybody's radar. My fourth one would be infrastructure, and that's probably on everyone's radar as well. Then I would include governance, and I would also include, I guess I'm into six now, but I'll throw it out there anyways. I would also include truth and reconciliation. I'm a positive person, and I like to emphasize the positive, and I will. But I need to lead off by giving some background which is somewhat negative. We, along with everybody else, have just come through the pandemic, and we know sooner finished getting through the pandemic than in Fort Frances, we got hit with the flood of the century the very next year. And then prior to that, our mill, which has stood here and given a great quality of life and quality of living to our community for almost 100 years. Like, it closed just shy of 100 years of operation. Our mill closed. And then we have demographics against us. And this is the last negative thing I'm going to say, but I need to set the stage. Demographically speaking, the Rainy River District and Fort Frances, we have declining population. The population of Fort Frances has gone from about 10,000 in the 70s, it's hard to believe that's 50 years ago, to about 7,500 now, and is continuing to decline. And so is the population of the Rainy River District. And why I mention that is economically, we want to attract business and industry to our community, to the district. And if you have a declining a declining population, what that means is that your pool of workers is diminished, and businesses and industry are going to want to have access to a stable pool of workers. And then later in my answer, I'm going to speak about how we address that. But that's the stage for the negative. And now I'll get into the positive. So, speaking of declining population, the population of the First Nations in the district, we have many First Nations in our district. The population of the First Nations is increasing and is expected to increase by about 18% in the next 10 years. So we're gaining population there. Add to that fact that local First Nations, district First Nations I should say, are extremely active economically. And I'll just give some examples. For example, the Nikikusumenicaning Band has bought businesses in town. They have real estate in town. They bought the Kitchen Creek Golf Course. And I was speaking to the economic officer of the band, and he indicated that he thought that that relatively small band had created somewhere around 200 to 250 jobs in and around Fort Frances. That's amazing. And that's one band. And all of the bands are active economically. Our friends and neighbors, Couchiching, have built a brand new arena. Now we're a hockey town. We have 2 ice surfaces in town. But having a 3rd ice surface means that you can host larger hockey tournaments, and those hockey tournaments are a real economic boost in the wintertime when you need it. As well, they have a beautiful golf course, and that's very attractive. We like to attract people in the summertime. Another band has just recently purchased a large tract of land next to Canadian Tire, and they plan on putting a restaurant there, a gas station, and some housing. I'll give one more example. I could go on and on about this, but Rainy River First Nations is another very progressive band with a very progressive chief, Chief Hort, and they have bought the International Bridge. Now that's an amazing and a huge purchase. 500,000 visitors a year come across that bridge, and they have a solar farm. And you had mentioned talking about the development of the mill yard. Well, the company River's Edge that's salvaging the mill, they've spun off a number of numbered companies, and one of their companies, I believe it's the BMI Group, is forming a partnership with Rainy River First Nations to look at repurposing and redeveloping that mill yard. So I think that it's fair to say that in the very near future, District First Nations are going to be one of the major employers in our district. And they are giving this district a real economic boost. Now, I'm going to switch gears there a little bit because I am the mayor of Fort Frances, and I would like to talk about Fort Frances. And I have to say that although we've taken a couple of economic hits due to uncontrollable circumstances such as the pandemic and the flood, we're positioned to make, I think, a really good economic comeback. We've weathered the mill closure. The border is open, and for a border town like us, having that border closed was catastrophic because 500,000 people a year coming across that bridge, and all of a sudden that tap turns off. And think of the effect that that has on our merchants. Think of the effect that that has on the tourist camps that are located in and around Fort Frances and on the lakes. It was dreadful. It was horrible for our tourist camp operators. But now the border is open, tourists are coming, tourism is coming back, tourist camps are filling up, and we have people in our stores and our restaurants. So we have weathered that. And then we had the flood, and again, that came along and wiped out everybody's docks. If you had houses or cabins near the waterfront, they were often damaged. Here in Fort Frances, our infrastructure was damaged. We had to declare a state of emergency. And we're still, by the way, in that state of emergency because we're still assessing what happened under the ground, under the pavement. But that aside, I had mentioned this earlier, Fort Frances is blessed. We are located in a beautiful part of Ontario. We're standing right here by the Hallett, which is a historic boat, and we're on Rainy River, which flows not too far from here in Rainy Lake. Both beautiful waters with great fishing. So what we have to offer is amazing, and we have things to offer that people in larger centers, whether they be American or Canadian, don't have. We have the great outdoors. We have lots of land. We have clean water. We have clean air. We have access to all sorts of recreational activities: hunting, fishing, boating, swimming, skating, skiing, hiking, snow machining. We have things to do outdoors for all seasons. That's an attraction. That can attract people to our area to help stem that declining population that I mentioned. We want to attract young families. We want to attract immigrants. We want to attract professionals. And having exciting things like that to do is part of it. Being able to give or advertise a lifestyle that you don't have in urban United States or in urban Southern Ontario is a real draw. In addition to that, we've got, I can't say this enough, we've got the cheapest electrical rates in Ontario. That should be a huge draw for business and industry. Our geographical placement is also ideal because we have excellent transportation routes by rail and by road into central US, where there are huge markets. In fact, the rail bridge at Rainier is the busiest crossing in North America. And in fact, it's so busy that they're going to have to be refurbishing it. It's been there a long time, and the rail traffic over that is taking its toll. We have an airport, which is essential. We have access to the Falls Airport. The town of Fort Frances, this is very unusual, the town of Fort Frances has no debt. We have paid off everything that we owe. So that puts us in a good position if we need to borrow money for projects. So I think that Fort Frances is well placed to welcome economic development into the future. And I might add, one of the most important things that we're doing right now, we're having trouble hiring just like everybody else is after the pandemic, but we are high on our list of priorities is hiring an economic development officer. And I'm hoping to get some good news on that relatively soon. But we had some key positions empty, and we've filled them. We just got a chief building official who we're very, very happy with. And we lost our recreation manager recently, and that position has been filled as of Monday. The new recreational manager is on the job. So we're filling the positions, the crucial positions that we need to fill, and we're going to be charging forward economically on other fronts as well. Speaking of housing and homelessness, and they are really two separate and distinct issues, I'll start with housing. There's a housing crisis in Canada. There's a housing crisis in Ontario, so it's no surprise that there's a housing crisis in northwestern Ontario and in Fort Frances and all of the small rural communities. Although it may seem to be more pronounced in smaller communities because we don't have the depth that larger communities have. But we desperately need in Fort Frances affordable housing. And I'm going to distinguish between that. We need affordable housing for young people and young families because we want to attract them to our community. And real estate prices in Fort Frances, just as in across the province, are very, very high. Although not as high, if anyone in Southern Ontario is listening, not as high in Fort Frances as they are in urban centers. So you can get some decently priced homes here, but it's high for us. And rents are up, and it would be high for young people just starting out. What I want to differentiate is we also need affordable housing for seniors. I should mention that the percentage of seniors and retirees in our community is increasing. And so we need to house them, we need to provide services for them. And when you provide affordable housing for seniors, sometimes you have to provide additional services. Sometimes you want to get into things called assisted living. But you get extra bang for your buck if you're putting housing money into housing for seniors. Because if you provide housing for seniors, then many, many seniors own their own homes. And if they can move into a nice housing establishment with some amenities or perhaps assisted living, first of all, they can stay out of senior homes, they can stay out of the hospital. That saves the government money. But also, they will put their homes on the market. And if enough seniors put their homes on the market, that could bring down the cost of homes, but it also frees up all sorts of housing for other demographics, whether they be middle-class people or young people just starting out. So there's some factors that we need to take into account. Now, most people associate housing with the DSAB, and we have a really effective DSAB in town. In fairness, I have to mention I'm on the DSAB board, but they've always done a tremendous job. And so they're out there being innovative, trying to deal with housing, although it's very difficult for small DSABs in big urban areas with low density population to get the funding that they need. Because funding for DSABs often is per capita. So we have a vast geographical area here, but not many people. So when you get per capita funding, it doesn't add up to a lot. And one of the carryovers from the pandemic is the cost of living's up. Transportation costs are up, construction costs are really high, so are wages when you can get people to come and build things. So construction people are in demand. So it's difficult with the funding we get to build right now. But the DSAB did purchase from the separate school board St. Michael's School. They're renovating that school for seniors. The other innovative thing they're doing, though, is that in the schoolyard there's a considerable amount of space there. They're going to build a number of 8-plexes, and those 8-plexes are going to be available for as affordable housing for young people, young families. I know that we've talked, when I say we, I mean the DSAB, have talked to some of the area First Nations. I believe that Seven Generations, an amazing educational institute, is interested in looking at one of those 8-plexes as a residence for their students. So there's lots of innovation in some of the things that the DSAB is doing. So that's kind of just a little bit on housing. We need it, and we need it very badly. Talking about homelessness now, though, is a completely different animal. And when I talk about homelessness, I want to make sure that people understand that not all homeless people are the same, just like the general population. Not all people are the same. Some people who are homeless because they're down on their luck, and if they're given a bit of a boost or some resources or some support, such as a job or housing, they can re-enter mainstream society and stay housed. But other people who are homeless are less fortunate, and some of them are plagued by addictions, some of them have mental health issues, some of them have both. And that makes that particular group of people more difficult to house, because government housing, such as housing provided by the DSAB, but other nonprofits and other government institutions, have rules. And some of the people who are homeless, who are either addicted to drugs or are having mental issues, find it difficult to follow rules. As an example, many housing complexes won't allow drug use on their premises. And some of the people who are homeless, who are addicted, do not or are not in a position to give up their drug use. So it does make it difficult to house them, and I'll say something more about that in a moment. To solve the problem of homelessness is going to take an all-of-government approach. We need the federal government, we need the provincial government, municipal government, not-for-profits. We need everybody working on this. It's not a problem that you can just throw money at, although money is essential. What the DSAB did was they partnered with the CMHA and they bought an old church, and they've spent a significant amount of money refabbing that old church. And so that shelter, the Out of the Cold shelter, is located in the basement of that church. Now, we have a fairly significant homeless population in Fort Frances. And the reason for that is we get the people who are homeless from throughout the district, including from some of the First Nations reserves, congregating in Fort Frances because that's where the services are. And so there's a fairly large number of homeless people living in Fort Frances, but when you look at the statistics from the Out of the Cold shelter, it has limited occupancy. And when you look at their statistics over the winter, over the very cold winters that we have here, it's not full because homeless people are choosing not to go there because they're not allowed to use drugs on the premises. There are rules. So that's one of the difficult things in dealing with homeless people. Getting back to the church, I'm really excited about this, and I'm really proud as a member of the DSAB board what the DSAB has done there. So they refabbed that church. They put a shelter in the basement, but in conjunction with the CMHA, they have created something called safe beds. Now, safe beds are staffed by CMHA. People can choose to put themselves in the safe beds, and they can stay there for 30 days. They can get off the streets. There are supports in place. There are trained people there to assist them. So that's a way of getting people out for a longer stay. The really exciting aspect is they also have another part of the church where they have what is called transition beds. Again, I think there's 5 or 6 of them. I can't remember the exact number. But people can stay in the transition beds for up to 2 years. And while they're there, they can access all sorts of resources. They can get access to education, to job training, to medical help, to all of the things that they need to reintegrate themselves into society. And at the end of that, if they stay for the 2 years, the DSAB will house them. So there's a process that's very slow. It's like a continuum of care. Homeless people can opt in at any stage. They can opt in to the shelter, to the safe beds, to the transition beds, to all of them. But if they're determined to get some help, the help is there. But as I mentioned, it's a slow process and it's not inexpensive. It took a lot of money, and it takes a lot of money to run that place. It took a lot of money to create that place. But people in the community are doing innovative things like that. Another thing that I think is really amazing is, again, it's the CMHA in conjunction and partnership with the OPP. They have crisis response workers. So they'll have a trained CMHA person and an OPP officer who will intervene when somebody is having a mental health crisis or perhaps a drug crisis. And it's being very effective, that program is, in keeping people out of the hospital, out of jail, and getting them help that they need when they're in crisis. The OPP have also just recently put into place a community resources officer who is out and about and is really emphasizing the aspect of the police motto to serve and protect, the serve part. He's going to the shelters, he's going to where the people are who are perhaps down on their luck or who are perhaps homeless, and talking to them and letting them see that the police are there to help. They're just not there to incarcerate people or to punish. So there are innovative things that different organizations are doing in town. There's another organization I want to talk about, the Family Center. So the Out of the Cold shelter in the winter, that closes in the morning. and doesn't open again until the evening. But the Family Center, which is all citizen run, it's all run by volunteers, it doesn't get any government money, it's run by donations. They provide a warm and a safe place for homeless people to congregate. Actually, anybody can go there. You can get food, you can take a shower, you can wash your clothes. So there's an example of people in the community stepping up. Even something like the library. The library welcomes everybody. We have a number of homeless people go to the library because they can access computers there, because it's a safe place and they know that they're welcome and they are welcomed in. So I'm really proud of this community for the various organizations stepping up to do what they can do. Although, as I mentioned, we aren't by any means solving the problem, but we're doing what we can to help. Even our paramedics, we have an amazing paramedicine program here in Fort Frances, and it's not just unique to Fort Frances, but I think a lot of people aren't aware of it, where you can contact the paramedics not to be taken to the hospital, but they'll come to your house and assist you with various things at your home to keep you out of the hospital. It's amazing, and it saves government money, so the money can be spent elsewhere. It's a really important topic to me. It's near and dear to my heart. I believe strongly in it, so I would like to do it justice. But just speaking briefly to it, the town of Fort Frances is committed to the suggestions coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. They aren't really suggestions, they're more directives. And we're just in the process of creating a Truth and Reconciliation policy, which is really important, and we really want to get it right. As well, we have a committee. We actually had a committee called a First Nations Advisory Committee, but we're changing the name of it to the Indigenous Relations Advisory Committee, and we're in the process of writing a terms of reference for that committee, because we feel that a committee like that is really important when you're dealing with issues of truth and reconciliation and relations with our friends and neighbors on the First Nation reserves. I personally try to show my support for First Nations in any ways that I can. I go on the walks, I go to the fish fries. We're going to be reaching out to all of the First Nations in the Rainy River District with a letter just saying, hey, we're here, we'd like to partner with you, we'd like to work with you, what can we do to help? But that's a really big and a really deep topic that should be, I think, first and foremost on every municipality's list of things to do. The other thing that we're in the process of doing is we, like all communities, have a territorial acknowledgement at the beginning of every meeting, but too often those territorial acknowledgements, they're just a statement that you read by rote, and they need to be more. They need to be a living, dynamic expression of appreciation that we're sharing the land. So we intend to do something with that as well, where it's not always the same, where we're not just reading something, we may be taking an action. And I think the final thing that I'll just mention on Truth and Reconciliation right now, actually I'll mention two things, is I'm really excited that tomorrow at noon, Fort Frances High School is hosting a powwow. We never had things like that when I was at high school, but what a wonderful way of showing cultural diversity and showing that you're proud of all of your students by looking at cultural aspects of different communities. So I'm really proud of them, and I'm going to go to that powwow. I've been invited. The other thing that I'm really excited about, and I hope other people are excited about, is the fact that this year is the 150th anniversary of the signing of Treaty 3. And all of us are living on Treaty 3 territory. In fact, all of us are treaty people. And I think that it's really exciting that this year we're celebrating 150 years since that treaty has been signed. And I know that Treaty 3 is having various celebrations. They're celebrating to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. And in July, they're having a celebration here at Seven Generations Educational Institute. And did I mention again what an amazing, innovative institute that is? And I certainly will be attending those celebrations. What I really want to see, we had a difficult term of council last term, and I think that we have a really good council this year. We have a good mix. We have a lot of people from different backgrounds, and everybody is working together for the good of the community. And I absolutely love that. And what I want to see with this council is good governance. I want to see more transparency. I think that we don't consult our citizens enough, so I want to make sure that we have a mechanism by which we can get information from our community. And also, we need a seamless process by which people can tell us when they think we're not getting it right. We want to know if we're not getting it right because we want to fix it. So we value that type of thing. And toward that end, we've taken two actions. One of which we commissioned a consultancy firm to do a report on governance, and we just got the final report. I won't go into any details now, but we're pretty excited about that, and they made about 14 recommendations. There's not one that I disagree with, and over the next few months, we're going to start initiating some of those recommendations with the goal of being more efficient, more transparent, and trying to fulfill the needs of our community. And the second thing that I wanted to mention is it's early in our term of council. This month we're starting to work on a strategic plan that's going to take us through the entire term of council and hopefully into the next. And there's a case where we really want to solicit community input. We want the people in our community to tell us what they want Fort Frances to be like, how they want to see us govern, what they want to see the various services that we provide be like. So we're really going to be soliciting community input. So yeah, so I'll just leave you with the thought that I'm very optimistic about Fort Frances on so many levels. I'm optimistic about our council. I'm optimistic about our future, and I want to work well with this excellent council that we have to position Fort Frances well for the future and to make Fort Frances a better place to live, work, and play.